You know I like storytelling. So it's incredibly appropriate then that we begin the first interview of Season 5 with someone who I think is an artisan in the craft of storytelling.
You know, the old Hemingway quote was that when you're sitting in front of the white piece of paper in the typewriter, the empty piece of paper, it's like you're facing a bull. And in my case, when you go for a long walk, it tends to uncork things. So I know I'm discovering this very late in the day, but nevertheless, it's kind of refreshing to find a technique that actually stimulates your creativity.
I'm glad you found yours, and I've been a huge fan of solvitur ambulando for a long time. That's everything is solved by walking.
Is that like the 6th century Roman? What's the
pretty much the whole Stoicism thing? That's the latest. But yeah, I was actually, to share a secret with you, I was a classics major as an undergrad.
Oh.
Back in the Roman era. It seems like forever ago.
Brother.
And I have found more use for my classical education 30 years later than I did when I was in school or directly out of school.
There's a quote that my father used to always tell me. He would tell me, mankind is clever but not wise. And you should not put too much energy into thinking that you've got it all sussed out just because you're clever at something.
There are certain values and practices that withstand the test of time. As Goethe wrote, he who cannot draw on 3,000 years is living hand to mouth. Timeless leadership connects the stories and experiences of modern leaders with lessons of the past that we know to be beautiful, useful, or true. Through the swirling maelstrom of change and uncertainty that perpetually threaten progress, our North Stars are character, culture, communication, and other timeless principles. This is where leaders learn. This is timeless leadership.
Hey, it's Scott Monty. Welcome to Timeless Leadership, where we look at the attributes, character strengths, and values that make leaders who they are. These are the same kinds of values that are relevant in the 21st century as were relevant in the first century. Just a quick note before we jump in here, please subscribe to the show on the podcast platform of your choice. We're available everywhere you get podcasts, and leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. It's pretty simple to do, and just leaving us a 5-star review would make a lot of difference. Check us out wherever you happen to listen to us and do the appropriate rating on that platform. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to Timeless and Timely, the newsletter where we try to find the present in the past and the past in the present as we explore human nature, leadership, and communication. You can get it all at timelesstimely.com. And check out my website, scottmonty.com, if you are interested in bringing me in to speak to your team, to your executives, and to work with your C-suite on creating better communication techniques and living your values every single day. Check me out at scottmonty.com. Storytelling, I think, gets short shrift. People use it as a shortcut, but there's really a craft to it. And it takes time and expertise to hone that craft, like any kind of craft. And that's why I spent a lot of time in depth with Neal Foard talking about his history, his techniques, and his secrets. And if you stay tuned, because this is a rather long interview, you'll hear where you can get additional outtakes and conversation from our talk. Thanks for being here. Let's get right to it. Storytelling is dulce et utile, as Horace wrote, charming and useful. And if you've ever had the experience of watching a Neal Foard video, That's the kind of content he provides, charming and useful. Neal Foard is an award-winning advertising and marketing creative professional with leadership experience in advertising, experiential marketing, and client-side brand development. He's consulted on creative messaging for Fortune 500 companies, governments, and universities. Neal says, marketing is not just storytelling, it's relationship building. It's conversation. So it's listening and promise keeping. Neal has gained a following on social media for his inspirational videos about the kindnesses of everyday people. And if you haven't experienced Neal's brand of stories, you'll find him somewhere at the nexus of David Ogilvy, Paul Harvey, and Mr. Rogers. His latest project is called Storyfire, where he teaches you to become a skilled storyteller. Neal Foard, welcome to Timeless Leadership.
Thank you. That is a brilliant synopsis. I'm going to steal all of that messaging that you just did for my own marketing.
Please be my guest. We are nothing but generous here.
The nexus of Paul Harvey and
David
Mr.
Ogilvy
Rogers
and Mr. Rogers. There you go.
David Ogilvy. Oh my God! I should hope so. Woo!
The big three, right?
Oh my God! I couldn't be more tickled by that combo.
Well, it's interesting
Especially
because
Mr. Rogers.
I've been a huge Paul Harvey fan for almost my entire life.
Me too.
His rest of the stories are just magic. And, his son and he worked on them together. Mr. Rogers, obviously somebody who influenced me as a child, but even more so as an adult as I become to realize that the simple wisdom that he preached was something that we could all use. And of course, I was struggling for a third because you always want 1, 2, 3.
Right.
And of course, David Ogilvy, who kind of set the stage for how advertisers tell stories and relate to people. So you fit the bill, my friend.
I appreciate that a lot.
Tell me about the most memorable story you've ever heard.
Well, I would like to direct people to, if they haven't already seen Steven Spielberg's Lincoln, I highly recommend that. And even if you've seen it, I recommend watching it again, because what they illustrate is a man who readily reached for stories in order to persuade, in order for people to reach an understanding, in order for people to understand what was in his soul. Now, I don't know how many of the stories that they tell in the movie Lincoln himself actually told. I suspect they got them from perhaps letters or recollections or speeches, but they are so skillfully delivered with such a human heart that they ultimately deliver what I'm trying to preach, which is it isn't enough to drop data on people. When you drop facts on people, they go, huh. But when you tell them a story, they go, oh. And that for me, when you watch Lincoln, you can see the power of somebody, a gifted storyteller, convincing people to do things they didn't think they could do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know that movie was based on Doris Kearns Goodwin's book.
Yes. Yeah.
Was it, I'm blanking on the name, Rivals.
Yeah, A Team of Rivals.
Team of Rivals, that's it.
Yeah.
My goodness. So I know she did her research, but, as you think about Lincoln, whether it's in those scenes or in history, he dealt with small groups of people. He dealt with his cabinet. He dealt with his children. He dealt with crowds of people who came to hear him. And in any of those cases, I think the stories that he told were instructive, told something about him as well as something that he was trying to help them think about differently.
Yeah. It's no accident that it would have been.
Yeah.
It would have been Lincoln that gave us the phrase, the better angels of our nature.
Exactly.
Or perhaps I'm misdoing that. I'm so glad that you pointed out that it was Doris Kearns Goodwin that wrote that book, because I didn't give her sufficient credit for having been the origin of that story. I'm certain that the source material would have been something she researched fanatically.
Oh.
Have you ever heard her speak? She's brilliant.
She is. And her latest book is her memoir with her and her husband, which itself it's a wonderful love story, but it's also a story of how they went from the turbulent 60s to the 2000s together. And it's I've just started reading it, and it, again, marvelous stories about how they actually tackled things together.
I absolutely love stories of successful relationships. You know, do you remember Paul Newman was married to Joanne Woodward?
Yes.
And they were married forever.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness. I mean, whatever flaws they may have had, at least they stuck together. It's so reassuring.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, isn't it? We see so many stories in the tabloids and on social media and whatever about breakups. You know, it's almost like watching a train wreck. And it seems like these long Hollywood relationships, and there seems to be very few of them because they stand out in our minds, right?
There are some. Pierce Brosnan, who I had an opportunity to meet in person, not that he would remember me, but I certainly remembered him. He was a long married fella, and quite devoted to his wife, who I gather died. But by the way, can I just tell you a quick anecdote? I met Pierce Brosnan in a hamburger hamlet in Westwood, and this would have been right about just when he was being cast as James Bond.
Wow.
And he is superhuman good looking in person.
Yeah.
He's tall. He's like 6'2". And I sat down at a bar. He was waiting for someone. And I sat down next to him, not realizing he was sitting there. All I saw was the back of this fellow in this beautiful crisp white shirt and a blue blazer. And I sat down next to him. It took me a while before I knew it was Pierce Brosnan. This is what I was reacting to. So out of the corner of my eye, I can sort of see his face. And I'm thinking, gosh, dang, this guy's a good looking guy. You know, and I then turned to look at him and I realized who it is. And I'm sorry, but I couldn't take my eyes off him because I'm like, you are so much better looking in person than you are on the screen. And you know, the screen is like super revealing. The screen picks up everything. But I'm going, no, it's quite different. When you see a real human being that looks like that, you go, you're not possible. You're not possible. And what then happened would have given you such a thrill, because what happened was there was these two gals across from us. At the time, Hamburger Hamlet had this like horseshoe bar. So the bartender was in the middle and you would sit across from people. You could see them. And this couple of gals from Ohio or wherever, they were wearing their Disneyland sweatshirts. They spotted him, of course, and you could just see from the body language. This was back before cameras in phones. And you could just see them working up their courage to bring their little Kodak Instamatic over and ask for an autograph. Well, he sees them, obviously, right? And so he, instead of waiting for them to come over, he turns to me and he goes, watch this. And then he goes over to them and he says, hi, I'm Pierce. And yeah, we know you. Because I couldn't help noticing that you're from out of town. Generally, people that wear the sweatshirts from Disneyland are not from Los Angeles. And I thought it would be kind of fun for us to take some pictures together. Aww. They can't believe this is coming out of his mouth.
Right.
And then it's not just that they're taking pictures, he's mugging it up, right? And he's saying, you know, we have to act like and by the way, the bartender's taking the pictures. God bless this guy. He was having as much fun as they were. He says, we have to make it look like we're having a conversation, like we've been here for hours. And so they're game. And so they're posing and he has his hand on his chin and he's resting his hand under his elbow so that it looks like he's listening to some dissertation. By the time he was done, they must have gotten, well, they took the whole roll.
The whole
right?
roll, yeah.
And then he sat back down and I'm looking at him and I'm going, I've never seen anybody having as much fun being a star in my life. Do you know how, the paparazzi ruined it for everybody.
Right.
Because then it becomes like, they're selling the photos instead of Pierce just absolutely in love with making their day.
Yeah.
Well, he made their month.
He made their lives, I bet.
They're going to lunch on that for decades.
If anyone has copies of those photos, please send them in. We'd love to see what they look like.
I would absolutely dearly love to see it. Well, he couldn't have just done that with them. I'll bet you there's a bunch of people he probably did that with.
Well, sure. I mean, that's somebody who has been in this situation before and who understands people, right? And not only has he given them the thrill of their lives and a story to tell their grandchildren, But he's given you a story, and I think what you just demonstrated there, Neal, is a signature of what I've come to appreciate about your videos and your storytelling, is that you take these little moments and you extract details from them, and you bring us with you into that moment. But I'm interested in how you do this. Where do these moments of inspiration come? How do you manage to, extract so many of these things, whether it's the bartender in Chicago or sitting with Pierce Brosnan here? Tell us a little bit about how you catalog and create these stories.
When I was in advertising, like you, I was a creative director, so I was often the one that had to sell the concept to the client. And the clients are taking a big risk. Back in the day, before metrics and digital metrics were available and all the data, the clients really were taking an enormous risk to choose this concept in creative, and then they would have to pay all the money to produce the commercial, and then they would run it, and you didn't know if it worked until, it was a real crapshoot. So you really had to sell it to them. You had to present something as being sufficiently compelling that they had the sense that, yes, that will work. That will move people to purchase something. And, I got my sort of 10,000 hours of thousands of presentations trying to persuade clients the merits of a creative idea. And that was a graduate degree in persuasion. You know how, I don't know if you've ever taken a debating course or you've entered one of those debate contests, but they do this unbelievably artificial construct of how you persuade people. It's just a flood of points done at incredibly high speed with barely taking a breath. Have you ever seen this? Have you seen them do this?
I have, yeah.
And I'm looking at it going, what? Who? What? First of all, you're never going to persuade someone that way. So I'm not sure what you're teaching these kids, but this is the last thing you would do when you're trying to persuade someone to change their minds about something or adopt something. And in fact, the evangel that I'm preaching lately when it comes to storytelling is that you've got to make it a gift. Give me a gift. Make sure that when you tell me a story, it leaves me better off than when I arrived. And to that end, Scott, what I'm trying to do with my stories is I'm trying to say, I'm looking, as I walk through life, I'm looking for moments that teach me something and that teach me something useful that will help me. I call it, I'm in search of the owner's manual. We're born into, parents who do their best, but they haven't really gotten a definitive guidebook on how to raise children. And, they raise flawed children, and these people go on to have children, and we're all just a bunch of flailing, lonely, insecure, with well-intentioned, but the way that a Neanderthal might be well-intentioned.
Yeah.
They're like, I'm trying to do my best here, but I don't know what the hell lightning is made of. I don't know why it snows. What are the seasons about? And by the way, why do we die? What's that for? So in our ignorance, we imagine that other people have all of their stuff together, and we imagine that we're just great imposters. And unless we're sociopaths, in which we don't wonder that. Yeah. And so in this spirit of, I'm just trying to relieve other people's confusion and loneliness and suffering, you'll find around you evidence that we're not so bad. And so my technique, if you will, is I'm in search of the good. And what I discovered when I was pitching concepts in advertising is if you can reassure a client that we're all in this together, that the human experience is one where don't try to sell somebody something, try to make a friend, and they'll be grateful to you for that gesture, and they'll probably reciprocate. And I'm happy to say that many, many of the brands I advertised, with very few exceptions, I was a huge believer in. Like I really believed what I was telling people. I did advertising for Toyota, which I was incredibly proud of. and for Lexus and for Budweiser, which again, I was incredibly proud of that brand. I loved that brand and what they stood for. You remember the Clydesdale advertising?
Of course.
And these
Of course.
very, very sentimental Christmas time commercials that they would do. And I did advertising for Men's Health magazine. And again, I was a huge believer in their mission. I don't know if you ever got Men's Health magazine, but good Lord, that's useful. That is such a great publication.
Yeah. Well, I think
Go ahead, sorry.
What you're getting into is, if you're going to tell a story about something, you have to, it has to touch you personally. You have to have a belief in it. You can't tell somebody else's story, right? At least not the same way.
You can. Can I? Let me give a bit of advice when it comes to storytelling to your audience, which is, if you are going to tell a story, please don't make yourself the hero of it.
Yep,
And
100%.
it's perfectly all right to make yourself the center of the story. That is, this happened to me, and I noticed this, and then I saw that, and this person. But I would reserve. Excuse me. I was just about to burp. I would fight the urge to make yourself the hero for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
The first is that when you tell a story in which you are the hero, automatically you invite skepticism that it didn't happen that way. And guess what? It probably didn't. The second reason that you don't make yourself the hero is that what you want from telling someone a story is to be standing next to them, observing the events, and not ask them to look up at you like an admirable figure, Because when you invite people to think of you as heroic, when you claim that you're great and you did something really awesome, they sort of, not only do they not believe you, but they also sort of can't wait for you to get your comeuppance. There's nothing quite so unattractive as bragging. I don't understand how these people that, maybe you can enlighten me. I've never understood the attraction of people that go online and brag about their stuff, and then they amass millions of followers. I don't grasp the appeal. Do you know why people would find that appealing?
I wish I could tell you, Neal. It's been a frustration of mine for a long time. I just kind of, I loathe self-promotion. I just I do my thing, I put my content out there, and I think it speaks for itself. If I have to tell people what it says or what I think about myself, well, then I've defeated the purpose of producing any of it.
That's my sensation. Perhaps it's generational. There might be something that's different in the experience of Gen Z or something. Although my daughter finds that kind of thing repulsive. Both my son and daughter find braggarts absolutely repulsive. And for the purposes of educating my clients on storytelling, what I'm trying to convince them of is that it's not what you say that matters. It's what people hear. And when they hear you brag about yourself, there is a subsonic signal that you're not credible.
Right.
And on the other hand, there's something delightful in celebrating other people's triumphs. The mark of a truly sincere and great friend is the delight they take in your successes.
Yes.
There's something you can really tell when you have some good news or they heard some good news about you. And they have you ever had this experience where you heard something nice that somebody said about you and they never gave you the indication that they didn't do it in order to get something out of you.
Yeah.
They just said something nice about you behind your back and you found out about it.
Yeah. It's a gift.
It's a real gift, and it frames them, the person that said that nice thing about you behind your back. It frames the way you look at them completely differently.
Yeah.
When you go out into the world and you are sharing stories about other people's successes with a certain joy, they not only benefit from that, but other people go, oh, that's the type of person that likes to celebrate other people. They're generous with their praise.
Yeah.
And they're very circumspect about their own self-aggrandizement.
It really tells you who your true friends are. I wrote a piece a while back called The 3 Levels of Friendship. And it was actually from Aristotle, believe it or not, but, updated. There's the friendship of utility, right, based on what someone can do for you. There's the friendship of pleasure, based on, enjoying a shared activity or a common bond.
Yeah.
And then there's the friendship of virtue for people who like you just for who you are, like Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
And I think when you have a gift like what you just described of someone being kind to you without your knowledge to other people, that really is one of the hallmarks of a friend. And I'm reminded of an old P.G. Wodehouse quote. I don't know if you've read any Wodehouse, but he is hysterical. In one of his Jeeves and Wooster stories, I think, he said, the usual drawback to success is that it annoys one's friends so.
Oh, my Lord.
And there's obviously a little bit of cynicism there, but you find out who your true friends are in situations like that.
Yeah, yeah. You know, by the way, that sentiment, look, we're all biological cocktails of competing and contradictory emotions. And so we are subject to jealousy when good things happen to our friends. But the impulse to allow yourself to experience joy at the success of your friends is a growth opportunity for all of us. And we really must not surrender to our bad impulses of the jealousy of an achievement of somebody else.
Yeah.
There's nothing quite so cleansing as having the strength of your own conscience. That is, not having to apologize for your behavior. It's in my youth, I think I had some kind of imbalance of hormones or something. I was a furious young man. It's miraculous that I did not join some extremist group and bomb something, because I had just a ferocious temper, and it's something I've been fighting ever since. Luckily, as you get older, that drains out of you quite a bit. But nevertheless, because I had to fight that violent streak in my soul, the battle, the struggle, that it becomes cleansing if you win it.
Yeah.
And part of the reason that I'm out there trying to tell these wonderful stories is to reassure myself that it's true, that if you were to inspect the human race and assign values to how good people are, what you're going to find is that the vast, vast majority, I would say over 89% of people are pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like they have the capacity to be a really good and loyal friend and to experience joy when you're successful. I think that the Wodehouse quote is, I think it sounds cynical, but I think he's just having some fun.
Yeah.
I think if there's this joke, I know you've heard it, which is, these are the useful objects during a zombie apocalypse. If I were to draw you a chart, obviously very valuable is a shotgun, but of even greater value is a slower companion.
Yeah.
And now, the reason both you and I laugh at that is because you can see the utility of having somebody to leave behind, right? But the truth is, the reason we laugh is because we know that in our hearts, that's not true. We really wouldn't do that.
Right. Right.
That the best way to survive, obviously, is to stick together.
Yeah.
And that the human superpower is cooperation and togetherness. So I think that when you hear the Wodehouse quote, you're laughing because you see the seeds of honesty about it, but at the same time you go, no, it's not.
Right, exactly.
It wouldn't be your friends.
It wouldn't be funny then, right.
Yeah, it would just be sad.
Right, exactly. So I'm curious about the process of storytelling, and I want to give you a chance to talk about Storyfire, but I've got a fundamental question behind that, and that is, can anyone learn to be a great storyteller?
Well, let's think of it like learning to play golf. It's an art form, ice skating. I learned how to ice skate very late in life, and that, anybody can learn it. It's a question of practice. And, what pleasure can you take out of it so that it's not work? So, the answer is, of course, we can all learn to do it. The benefit that I had was I was forced by my profession to do it over and over and over again. There's no way I would have spent that many hours in front of a mirror telling myself stories. and forced by profession to tell the stories with the judgment being, did you persuade them? You over time you learn to be persuasive as well as to tell a good story. I can say that what typically happens when people are trying to teach each other the art of storytelling or presenting, standing up in front of a room and being able to be persuasive, they often focus on the wrong things. people are nervous about what to do with their hands or how much eye contact they should have or how to project or inflection, all of that stuff. That to me is the superficial stuff that you can handle pretty easily. What is more important to me is what is your motive? Does the story that you tell come from a good place? And I have these sort of principles that I live by after a long life, one of which is life is a team sport. Start to recognize that you're not in this on your own. You're in this with other people. And those other people can provide you with food for your soul and reassurance that you're not alone. You can, if you just acknowledge that life is a team sport and that it's more fun when you have companions in this journey, then you recognize the second principle, which is life gets so much easier when people like you. And how does storytelling help you in that act? Well, when what you choose to talk about, is it uplifting? Does it make people feel good? Even if it makes them weep, are the tears kind of cleansing? Because I often tell the story that sometimes when I tell it, I can barely get through it without crying myself. And it's about this veterinarian that my son did an internship with. And what happened was my son was very surprised to discover how much of a veterinarian's life is taken up by having to deal with people's grief over an animal they have to put down.
Yeah.
And because that how attached people get to their dogs. Dogs are just guiltless, and they deserve our love in a way that other human beings, it's hard to do, right? And so this woman comes in, and she was a client. She'd come in for years, but she was being incredibly rude with the staff and super hostile. And she was very well-to-do. So the attitude of the staff, as she has arrived to just drop off the dog to be euthanized and then leave, right? They couldn't believe their ears. And the way that they perceived her was, well, this is a textbook example of an entitled diva. But the veterinarian had known this woman for quite a while. So she came out and she said, why don't you come back and come into the back room and we'll do this together. And she wasn't having it. And because this veterinarian woman was so persuasive and so gentle, eventually she talked her into it. And my son said that what she said to her was, she goes, I remember the first time you brought Sonny in. You're doing great now, but do you remember back then? Wow, it was one thing after another. You were all alone in the world and you weren't doing very well, and it was rough going. But I remember that when you brought Sonny in for the first time, you were devoted to that dog. And I thought, oh, how lucky this animal is to have her. And I have to tell you. And then she touched her arm and she said, he's lucky to have you here now.
Yeah.
And the dam burst.
Yeah.
And she just wept into this dog's fur as they put him to sleep. And it was many, many minutes before she finally emerged from the room, puffy-faced and cried out. And she gave this vet one of those deeply emotional, sustained hugs, which everybody was shocked at because they hadn't seen what had gone on,
right?
Nor had they heard it. And then finally, when the woman departs, one of the other gals says to her, how could you possibly be so sweet to that woman after the bitch that she was? And the response was, you don't get angry with an animal that's injured when it nips at you. Mm-hmm. You don't know what kind of pain people are carrying around. Everybody responds to grief differently. And when I heard that story, I thought, wow, there's an education in having a little grace towards people. Say, when they're angry with you at Starbucks, you don't know what they're carrying around. For all you know, their uncle died that's right. Or they just lost their job. Or, and yes, some people don't. Some people are just walking around vibrating with anger, but not everybody. And therefore, we have to grant each other a little grace. Well, okay. So in the telling of that story, I'm trying to give other people the benefit of my having heard it. Like, what did I learn from it? And so the choice of the story you tell says a lot about you.
Yeah.
And I don't think people are careful enough about what stories they choose to tell about their business or about their relationships. It's particularly important in business that we be very careful of what we choose to repeat. And you'll notice that when Nike in particular was using Michael Jordan as their sort of hero draft horse, do you know they often would tell stories about Michael Jordan about the number of times he failed? Like that would be the focus. Now, why would they do that? Why would they humanize him like that? Because greatness isn't in the God-given talent. Greatness is in the pursuit.
Yeah.
It's in the stick-to-itiveness and the never. In other words, it's something. Hey, you can achieve this too. It's possible. And by the way, you're a champion for just trying. You know that phrase, or I can't remember what it is, but when they say, even if you only do one rep at the gym, you're at the gym. There's a bunch of people that aren't here, and you're winning.
There you go. Yeah.
And that's what I've always found the power of Nike's brand was in the way that it encourages you to seek achievement. And I think that that's the kind of brand that you can believe in because they're expressing their belief in you. And just bringing it back to storytelling, I don't think people are conscious enough or careful enough about the tales they choose to tell. And that's one of my central things in Storyfire is to try to keep beating that into people, how important it is that what you talk about is uplifting.
So Storyfire, what can people expect when they sign up for Storyfire?
Yeah, essentially, it is the distilled wisdom of 30 years in the propaganda business, where not only am I capitalizing on the thousands of presentations that I made and trying to communicate, these are the things that I learned about what makes you more persuasive. And essentially, what they're going to hear from me again and again is that it is not sufficient to be persuasive in your argument. They must have an emotional response to you. Your objective primarily is to make them feel like you're a friend, make them feel friendly towards you. And in order to do that, you have to be legit. You have to be friendly. You have to offer them value. And in the Storyfire course, so it's about vastly more than here's how to build your story around a 3-act structure, and here's how you build the conflict so that it is, interesting, and you're rooting for the characters as they get to the end. The Storyfire course very much orients towards here's how you can win people over. So in a way, it's kind of redistilled Dale Carnegie. And
I like that.
How to win friends and influence people. But on top of that, what I'm able to do is I'm able to put this in the form of, look, if you're going to do things on social media, here are the things you should watch out for. If you're going to stand in front of an earnings call or a company-wide meeting, here are the things people need to know about your motives. It's essential that they know where you're coming from and not just drop data on them. They have to get a sense from the way that you put things that they care that you win and they feel like they're on the journey with you. One of the examples I use, and this is a kind of preview, if you will, of the Storyfire methodology, is that chimpanzees, a very close biological cousin to humans, have hierarchical societies the way that we do. And their troops are usually led by a physically dominant male. But even an incredibly strong chimpanzee leader will not survive if he is perceived as too bullying or not sufficiently caring about the fate of the weak members of the troop. And that if he doesn't mind his P's and Q's and he's not sufficiently, what's the word I'm looking for? He doesn't dole out justice equitably. The troop will literally tear him limb from limb and they will chew off his face. Have you ever seen a chimpanzee's teeth?
Yeah.
They've got these enormous fangs. And if you've ever seen a chimpanzee without his fur, it would scare the living crap out of you. They are really ripped. You take one glance at one, you go, I'm never going near one of those animals again, because they have incredibly quick tempers and they have radar for fairness. So what do we learn from this? That human beings are very similar. We have a finely tuned radar for fairness, and we are very quick to temper. Therefore, as a leader, you should always manage to communicate that you care about the people that work for you. You have their interests at heart. And by the way, it helps when you really mean it.
Yeah.
But you will last a lot longer when people don't have the urge to chew your face off. And I don't think there are enough leaders that understand, in the same way that you often have to tell your spouse you love them, like it helps.
Yeah.
It helps when a leader is able to communicate to the people that work for them that they care about them. And you don't have to necessarily say it overtly. In fact, it's much better if you just demonstrate through acts. But this is the power of stories. I don't have to literally say to you, I care about you. I just have to express, because of the stories I choose to tell, that I am the type of person that cares about the fate of others. And so the Storyfire course it's not just technique, it's motive. It's about the art of persuasion in the sense that you're trying to win people over subsonically, taking advantage of the limbic part of their mind, the mammal part of their mind, to make them feel like they know you and that they like you. And just life gets so much easier when people like you.
That is beautiful. So people can find out more about Neal's Storyfire course at storyfire.net. We'll have a link to that in the show notes.
I appreciate the way you're pushing this course of mine. You're being pretty cool, Scott. Thank you.
It's just a little value for our listeners here, and I've always
it's good. It's a good course. I'm sorry to brag,
no doubt. Well, you should. You are the hero in this case. You're allowing me to step back and make you the hero of our episode here. And I've been a big fan of stories for a long time. As a matter of fact, back when I joined Ford Motor Company, and I'm sorry to tell you, Neal, that's the proper way to spell Ford.
Well, it is the common way.
I joined in July of 2008. I was recruited as the first global head of social media and digital communications.
Oh, my.
And 10 days after I got there, this is on the heels of Ford starting to come out of almost bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Right? Alan Mulally was brought in from Boeing, and he left Boeing in a good place. They've kind of collapsed a little bit since then.
Yeah.
But his pledge was to make Ford profitable by 2009 and to start turning the ship around. And here we are, Q1 of 2008. Ford posts a $100 million quarterly profit. And I had been courted by them. I wasn't really thrilled about coming to Detroit. I lived in Boston at the time. And suddenly my radar went off. And I said, things seem to be going well there. Maybe I'll give them a shot. And the interview process began again, and I was offered the job, and I started on July 14th, 2008. And by the way, speaking of Toyota, a friend said, "Are you nuts? Why are you going to a loser company like that when you can be with a winner like Toyota?" Which Toyota ran into a few issues along the way, a few years after that anyway.
They had a recall. Yeah.
But I said, I want to be part of a comeback story, right? And nobody cares about just keeping the lights on and maintaining supremacy. I want to, really be part of this comeback story. Got there on July 14th, July 24th, 2008. I will never forget this date. 10 days after I started, Ford issued its Q2 earnings, an $8.7 billion quarterly loss, the largest in the company's history. Not too long after that, the global carpocalypse started.
Yeah.
And by that Thanksgiving, we were in front of Congress with the other U.S. automakers. Now, Ford wasn't taking the money, so they were there to support the entire industry, but we were lumped in as the big three, and it was our mission to separate ourselves from the other two. So we actually created a website, and I did this. I was on corporate communications. I worked with the marketing team over Thanksgiving weekend to stand up a WordPress site on the fly, which our IT team was livid about. But we wanted it done quickly.
Yes, but now they brag about it.
Right. Called The Ford Story, thefordstory.com. And it was very simple in its beginnings, but it began to evolve over the next few years as a storytelling place where we could highlight how other people experienced our products. It wasn't about us. It was about the lives we made possible. And there's one story that still stands out. Nana, 75 years old, sent in a picture of her Mustang 5.0 GT. And she was so proud of it because she bought it so that she could race her 18-year-old grandson in his Mustang. And I'm like,
Lord,
we couldn't invent a story like that. And there are thousands and thousands of people out there who are hungry to be heard, to tell how their lives have been changed. And we were more than happy to simply make that possible.
You've said a mouthful when people crave to be heard. It's one of the primary drives is to feel like you matter. Mm-hmm. And when a company gives people the opportunity to let them know that they know they're there, mm-hmm. that's a glorious thing. Did you ever have a chance to work with Jim Farley? Was he there when you were there?
Yeah, absolutely did. I have a clip of Jim Farley at Blog World in 2010 saying, "Scott Monty is my God," which I play over and over again.
Sweet. Well, that's our 6 degrees of separation.
Yeah.
I used to present to Jim Farley when he was at Toyota.
He was at Toyota, yeah.
And I always found him incredibly charming and
just a
good
genius of an auto market. Yeah, a very good storyteller. He told us a story at a major press event once of being 16 years old and taking his Mustang that he had fixed up himself. His family was a long Ford family. His grandfather worked on the assembly line. And taking that Mustang across the country without his father knowing one summer. And oh my God, the tales he came back with. And, the way his father was waiting for him in the driveway when he came back 2 months later. This is in a day before cell phones, obviously.
Yeah.
But he learned so much and he gained so much simply by going out on his own and having fun with his Mustang. And now he took over after, a few years after Alan Mullally left as CEO. So
it's not an easy job, but I just have to say my compliments to his creativity and his storytelling ability. He does manage to, in a way that I don't find as effective in other brands. He's able to share why it matters.
Yeah.
They're brilliant at auto shows, by the way. They do the best auto shows.
Earlier, we talked about 3 rules for living that you said you were going to share with our listeners, and I'm curious to you said one of them to me, but I want to make sure everybody hears all 3, and I'm curious as to what the other 2 are.
Yeah. So one of them is life is a team sport. Another one of them is life gets so much easier when people like you. And the third, and I think this may be the most important, is always leave a room better than you found it. That applies to everything from nature to a company to a dinner conversation. Don't walk away looking for your P&L. Leave the room making sure other people benefited and that you left it better than you found it. And I've noticed that the great bosses that I've had were very generous that way. They have you ever noticed how a truly brilliant boss, what a good listener they are?
Yes.
They say that Will Durant, the guy that really started General Motors, that his ratio of spoken to listened words was just, like he would say one word for every 10,000 he heard. And it's what made him so incredibly good at decision making was because he'd heard all the input. His intelligence gathering was robust.
Yeah.
And so for me, the leaving a room better than you found it isn't just a question of the physical manifestation. It's how people feel when they leave. Because in the business of persuasion, it's, to quote Maya Angelou, people often will not remember what you said, and they probably won't remember what you did, but they will definitely remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And so my 3 rules for living, starting with the idea that life is a team sport and that you're locked into this experience with other people, and you might as well try to make them feel good, make them feel reassured that they're not alone, and make them feel reassured that not everybody's out to get them, and give them some psychological comfort that will allow their creativity to emerge.
Yeah.
When I was in the advertising business and dealing with creative teams, boy, the number one way to make sure you get no new ideas is to put a bunch of pressure on people. Because what they'll do is they'll only revert to what worked before. But you probably have noticed this. When you heap a bunch of pressure and stress on people, their mind gets taken over by the fight or flight response, not the creative problem-solving response. You go into a company, you start doing mass layoffs, and you keep everybody in the dark about what the criteria are. Do you really seriously think they're all working that day? No. Half of them are looking for jobs, and the other half are talking in the hallways about like, what the hell's going on?
Right.
And anytime you engage in that kind of behavior where you are keeping people in the dark and putting them under the sword of Damocles, they are not engaged in what they're supposed to be doing. They're trying to survive. They're clicking into, survival mode. That's a very primitive part of the brain. So if you can go into the world in any company and you can make sure to reassure people that you're looking out for them, they needn't be worried, then their deductive reasoning and their creativity starts to come back.
Yeah.
So
one of the best bosses I ever had said, when given the choice, apply light, not heat.
Well, that's good.
And I thought that's a simple phrase, easy to remember.
Yeah.
And given a choice, I mean, you can either light the way for people or you can put the pressure on them. Mm-hmm. And I think you just described it extraordinarily well. When you deal in transparency, when you deal in lifting people up and giving them hope, providing a path forward, well, of course, they're going to follow. Now, I have to ask you, looking at your videos, and you've got this wonderful font design there. I'm curious, are you a Beatles fan?
Of course. I mean, good Lord, who isn't? But
then do you know what my next question is going to be?
No.
Is that the Helvetica New font?
Well, it's Helvetica. It is. My font is Helvetica Neue. It's bold that's been super compressed.
Yes.
I kern it so that I've removed all the space between the letters.
Yes.
And let me tell you the reason I selected that.
Please.
Was because I do a lot of presentations. That's sort of my gig, as I do live speaking engagements, and inevitably they'll want you to send them the deck, right? So that they can put. Even though I work on a Mac and I use Keynote, I have to send it to them in PowerPoint, and it's going to be played on a PC.
Yep.
I had to have a font that everybody has, so that when it got transported over to somebody else's computer, it wouldn't lose 90% of its design. So that was the madness behind that choice. Was just to
very
make sure
practical,
that was something everybody had. Yeah.
It reminded me of the that famous Fab Four T-shirt, John and Paul and Ringo and George. Mm-hmm. Same kind of design there. So familiar.
It's funny. My daughter. I do essentially the same setting every time. It's that black background, or sometimes it's a white background, but it's always just I am in limbo. And Tony's like, Dad, trust me, I've done a million thumbnails for these things, and you gotta do something else. It's not, I'm going, but sweetie, it's my brand.
Yeah.
That's my brand.
It works.
She says, yeah, but I think you've pulled all the oil out of that field.
Okay. Well, hey, see what else works.
Drink your milkshake. I think it's gone, Dad. You got to start doing crazier things. I don't know. I like having a brand that people recognize instantly when you come on. But,
well, I mean, look, imagine if somebody told Paul Harvey, you need to stop all those pauses.
Yeah. What?
It wouldn't have worked the same,
No,
I mean, boy,
it's.
Well, Neal, I can't thank you enough for joining us on Timeless Leadership today.
Oh, this is a thrill, Scott. Thank you for having me.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, you're the best.
If you'd like to continue listening to this conversation, this fascinating conversation that Neal and I had with each other, just make sure you're subscribed on Substack there as a paid subscriber. It's easy to do. It's about $5 a month. It gets you additional content here as well as additional essays and other thoughts from time to time in the newsletter. So check that out at www.timelesstimely.com. Please take a moment to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and share it around. In doing so, you can help the next generation of leaders on their journey. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Our theme music, Timeless Harmony, used with permission, was written by Matthias Leon and performed by the City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra. I'm Scott Monty. There's so much to learn.
Also, what a voice.
Oh, well, I've been told that here and there, and
It's very soothing.
I'm waiting for the big call from an agent. I don't have time to stand up my own voiceover audition sites and all the rest. It's a lot of work.
Yes. I will have to say though that sort of one last comment is that we are living now in an age of somebody I've never heard of has like 25 million followers.
Yeah,
it's astonishing how a really good night of ratings for a typical night show is like 2 million, maybe 3 million viewers. That at that point you can keep the lights on. But there are people out there getting 15 million views on a sort of regular rhythm, and that are essentially one-man operations.
Yeah,
this is the world we live in now, and with a voice and an aspect and orientation like yours. I mean, wow. It's all waiting to be mined.
Someday we'll see how this all works out. Well, I won't quit my day job in the meantime.